Welcome back, everyone. A blast in rhetoric, a fleet in motion, and a world watching as tensions between Iran and the United States escalate toward a point not seen in years. In the midst of this complex geopolitical standoff, Tehran has issued one of its most direct warnings yet. If the United States makes a move against Iran, we will strike. What does this mean? What has led to this moment, and could a misunderstanding or misstep trigger a conflict far more terrible than either side wants? In this video, we explore the latest developments, the history behind the warnings, and the real stakes of a confrontation that could reshape the Middle East and global security. The first signals of this latest escalation were not subtle. For months, global headlines have chronicled a buildup of U.S. military forces in the Middle East, including the deployment of the aircraft carrier USS Abraham Lincoln Strike Group, accompanied by destroyers, fighters, and electronic warfare aircraft. Statements from the White House have been unequivocal. Washington is prepared to use force if Tehran refuses to agree to its conditions on nuclear negotiations and regional behavior. President Donald Trump warned openly that time is short for diplomatic talks, and if Iran does not comply with U.S. demands, any future strike would be far worse than previous actions. Reuters Plus One, this warning comes amidst a backdrop of increasingly confrontational diplomacy. Trump has made clear that the United States wants Iran to return to negotiations, but that such talks cannot occur in an atmosphere of threats. Iranian leaders have interpreted and responded to U.S. military deployments and rhetoric as direct pressure and intimidation. Iran's foreign ministry condemned the idea of negotiating amid threats and insisted that credible diplomacy cannot coexist with preparations for war. Hurri, Daily News. Iran's own responses have not been limited to diplomatic language. Recent public messaging in Tehran has included a mural in Engelab Square depicting a U.S. aircraft carrier devastated by explosions, accompanied by the slogan, "If you sow the wind, you will reap the whirlwind," a poetic but unmistakable warning aimed at Washington. AP News. While the United States has renewed pressure on Iran over its nuclear program and domestic repression, Tehran has sent warnings of its own. Statements from Iranian military and political figures have emphasized that any attack on Iranian territory would be met with retaliation. In previous months, Iranian officials declared that if the United States were to attack, American and allied military bases in the region could become targets. These warnings extended even to neighboring states that might allow U.S. forces to use their territory or airspace for strikes. Tehran stated that such actions would be interpreted as participation and could draw a response. Euronews. That kind of messaging is stark and sobering. It reflects the reality that Iran's leaders view external threats through the prism of national survival. Decades of foreign intervention, sanctions, and covert actions have shaped deeply held perspectives within Iran's political and military leadership. These perspectives influence how Iranian leaders frame their warnings, even when they publicly claim they do not seek war. On the U.S. side, the logic of deterrence has driven Washington's posture. Officials in the United States argue that a strong military presence and vocal warning serve to deter Iran from pursuing what the U.S. describes as destabilizing nuclear advancement and regional interference. Trump's warnings, reinforced by the visible projection of naval power, are intended to pressure Tehran into compliance without triggering broader conflict. Yet deterrence is a delicate game. It only works until one side believes the other's threats are credible. Iran's warnings have aimed to convey that Tehran will not back down easily. Statements from military leaders have proclaimed that any U.S. attack would have consequences extending beyond Iran's borders, with Tehran prepared to target U.S. bases in the Middle East and beyond. One report even suggested that Iranian strategists are considering plans to place naval mines in the Strait of Hormuz, a critical choke point for global oil transport, as part of a broader defensive strategy. These developments come against a backdrop of internal unrest in Iran. Throughout late 2025 and into 2026, widespread protests erupted across the country. What began in some areas as demonstrations against economic strife quickly evolved into broader anger against the government's handling of domestic issues. Iran's security forces responded with force, leading to significant casualties and thousands of arrests. The Iranian government has sought to suppress information about the scale of the crackdown, causing international human rights organizations to condemn the violence. New York Post, within this pressure cooker of domestic instability and external threats, Tehran's leadership has emphasized national unity and resistance to foreign pressure. Iran's president has even delegated emergency decision-making powers to regional authorities, a move described as preparation for potential conflict scenarios, from supply shortages to the possibility of military action by foreign powers. Financial Times: this tension-filled landscape sets the stage for the stark warning, "We will strike." Whether this was a literal commitment to attack U.S. forces, a conditional deterrent intended to signal resolve, or a rhetorical device aimed at shoring up domestic support, makes a profound difference. But regardless of its interpretation, the message signals one core reality. Iran views the potential for U.S. military action against it as an existential threat. The risk of regional spillover cannot be overstated. Iran's connections with proxy groups across the Middle East, including militias and allied factions in Iraq, Lebanon's Hezbollah, and Yemen's Houthi rebels, mean that a direct conflict between Tehran and Washington could rapidly expand into multiple theaters. These networks have already demonstrated the capacity to strike U.S. and allied interests in the region in the past. While Iran itself may seek to control escalation, its affiliates operate with degrees of autonomy that make crises unpredictable. For Washington, the calculus is equally fraught. A military strike aimed at neutralizing Iran's nuclear capabilities or punitive operations in retaliation for perceived provocations could devastate infrastructure and military assets, but it could also trigger a broader confrontation. Analysts argue that the very deployment of an armada and warnings of a far worse response if negotiations fail may deter Tehran, but they also raise the stakes for misinterpretation and accidental escalation. Axios: in the heart of this volatile moment, diplomatic channels remain strained. Iran has publicly dismissed negotiations in an atmosphere of threats, and U.S. officials have echoed frustration with what they see as Tehran's unwillingness to meet conditions for a nuclear deal. This diplomatic impasse leaves little room for de-escalation outside carefully calibrated back-channel talks, and those, if they exist, remain hidden from public view. Yet history offers cautionary tales about such deadlocks. Moments of high tension, when both sides project strength and rhetoric hardens, are precisely when misunderstandings can lead to unintended conflict. The Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962, for instance, brought superpowers to the brink because of miscommunication and mutual suspicion. Similarly, the Iran-Iraq War of the 1980 spiraled into years of devastation partly because each side underestimated the other's resolve. In the current environment, even symbolic gestures, such as murals depicting destroyed aircraft carriers or public speeches in Tehran and Washington, carry weight. They are interpreted domestically and globally as indicators of resolve, threat perception, and willingness to escalate. Yet beneath the rhetoric, both sides also face constraints. The United States must consider the political and economic cost of open war, while Iran must balance its aspirations against the potential devastation of a major military conflict. This dynamic has led some international actors to urge caution. Gulf states, European governments, and United Nations officials have all expressed concern about the risk of miscalculation. Some propose renewed diplomatic engagement as the best path forward, emphasizing that neither the United States nor Iran truly benefits from a full-scale war. But their voices often struggle to be heard amid the roar of warships and warning statements. The strategic geography of the Middle East amplifies these tensions. The Strait of Hormuz, through which a significant portion of the world's oil supply passes, is a flashpoint. Iran's control over access to the strait gives it leverage, but also means that any disruption could have global economic repercussions. If Tehran were to act on its warnings against foreign bases or shipping routes, markets could react instantly, triggering economic shocks far beyond the region. Such consequences add layers of complexity to decision-making on both sides. Meanwhile, social media and news networks around the world amplify every statement, movement of troops, and public declaration. Public opinion in the United States and Iran is shaped not only by what leaders say, but how those words are portrayed, interpreted, and contested online and in broadcast media. In such an environment, rhetoric often overshadows nuance, and the risk of escalation rises as interpretations harden. At the center of all this is the question of intent. When Iran warns that it will strike if provoked, is it a genuine declaration of offensive intent or a deterrent designed to preserve sovereignty? When the United States warns of a far worse response if Iran refuses to negotiate, is it a calculated attempt to compel compliance or a gamble that raises the odds of conflict? These are not merely rhetorical questions. They are decisions that could have deep and lasting consequences. The truth is that no one can say for certain what will happen next. Diplomats talk in private, militaries plan in secret, and leaders weigh the risks of action against the fear of appearing weak. Meanwhile, ordinary people in both countries watch and wait, uncertain of what the next message, missile test, or naval deployment might portend. The stark warning from Tehran, "We will strike," exists within this broader context of uncertainty, projection, and strategic posturing. It is a line in the sand drawn in rhetoric, but whether it becomes a line crossed in action depends on a complex interplay of decisions, miscalculations, diplomacy, and chance. What is clear is that the world stands at a precarious moment where words carry the weight of war, and the next move by Washington, Tehran, or an allied actor could redefine not only regional dynamics but global security architecture. The warning that Iran has sent to America is not just about military firepower. It is about signaling resolve, defending national pride, and deterring what its leaders perceive as existential threats. Whether that signal leads to negotiation, détente, or devastating conflict remains unwritten. But as the forces gather and rhetoric sharpens, the consequences of misunderstanding or miscalculation loom large on the horizon.